Somehow I crossed the line, a blurring one, where the scents, echoes, and chills come less from outside my head and more from inside it. Memory and dream, the only places where I'm not blind. Today on the Comic Book Report, Daredevil Parts of a Whole by David Mack and Joe Quesada. Stick around and check it out. Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today we're back in Hell's Kitchen to review another Daredevil book. I'm going all the way back to the Marvel Knights era with Daredevil Parts of a Whole. I wanted to revisit this title with the upcoming Disney Plus Echo series, as this is where that character gets her comic book debut. It was also fresh in my mind because I just met the comic book writer for this book, David Mack, at a recent comic book event. Anyway, excited to dive in today, but before we do, just a quick shout out to our channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions, definitely check them out. You can find a link in the description for this video, and if you find something you like, you can use my discount code at checkout, TheComicBookReport, to save $2. Using my affiliate code or link to make a purchase will give me a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support the channel. Thank you for considering. Now let's get started with today's Daredevil review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written by David Mack and illustrated by Joe Quesada. The comics in this volume were published by Marvel Comics beginning in 1999. The volume itself collects Daredevil, the 1998 series, issues 9 through 15. And finally, this is a standard-sized trade paperback with glossy print paper stock, a glued binding, and a total of 176 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that trade paperback collection from Marvel Comics. I gotta say right from the jump, I do enjoy the front cover of this. We have some fascinating artwork here on the front with Daredevil and of course Maya Lopez, Echo, in a sweet embrace. It kind of hints at a maybe love story here going on between the two of them. I think it's a really gripping image, and I think it really works for this volume as a whole. The spine is nothing too remarkable. It's pretty similar to other Daredevil books at the time. It's mostly a black-spined book. And then the back cover of it definitely showcases the fact that this is a Marvel Knights title, and we have, again, some great depictions of Daredevil and Echo. A really fun little book. This is a older, slightly beaten up trade paperback volume. I do think they released this in hardcover, and I'm sure there's ones you can find, especially with the new Echo series coming out. And now that we've checked out the exteriors of the book, I do want to just spend a quick moment on the binding. Like I said, it's a simple glued binding, pretty standard for all of these trade paperbacks. This is an older book, and I will say the binding is still holding up fantastically. Very little gutter loss overall. This is a smaller collection, but you'll see more again as I flip through the collection. But overall, pretty solidly bound as far as I'm concerned. Now, I mentioned earlier in the video that I did get to meet David Mack, and I actually got him to sign my copy of this. I'm really excited, want to show you the signature. Mack was a really incredible guy. He was very generous with his time, and I got to talk to him for a few minutes just about Daredevil, my favorite character. Really such a blast. If you haven't checked out my other video, definitely give it a watch. But now let's go ahead and dive into the collection proper. As we make our way into this title, I will say that this takes place during that Marvel Knights era of Daredevil. It's an imprint at Marvel Comics that was geared a little bit more toward adult readership, and you definitely get more adult themes, things like that. This series isn't overly graphic. There's certainly a great degree of blood and some violence, but nothing too intense as far as I'm concerned, and it was a really good read. This also takes place directly after Kevin Smith's Guardian Devil run on the book, also during Marvel Knights. I believe that kicked off with a fresh issue 1 that also had Joe Quesada on artwork, so we do get some visual continuity between that and this title here, but we do have David Mack at the helm taking over as writer, and really this is such a fun read. I actually overlooked this title for a while. I read it once upon a time and really enjoyed it, but when I think about this period, I go straight to the Brian Michael Bendis era, which is my personal favorite run on Daredevil up to this point, but I sometimes overlook this work here, and frankly it is fantastic. fantastic. I really enjoyed revisiting this, reading some of those early issues, having it all come back to me. I was really wowed at just how much I enjoyed it. I'm not always a huge fan of Joe Quesada's artwork, but I will say this is some of my favorite pencil work I've ever had from him. It's really just beautiful artwork throughout. I'm also a fan of David Mack's incredible artistic style, some of that watercolor painted look. I was a little bit sad not to see much of it in this collection. He's done some covers and some things in it, but mostly Quesada. But honestly, Quesada does a great job, and Mack had some really tight prose here throughout the run. And overall, the setup of this book is basically the Kingpin, Wilson Fisk, is trying to make his move, trying to reestablish his criminal empire, kind of come ahead again as the Kingpin of crime. And we have Foggy Nelson and Matt Murdock, Daredevil, trying to basically undermine him, trying to take him to court, trying to topple his empire before it really takes over again. This is a period where Wilson Fisk, Kingpin, does know who Daredevil is. He does know it's the blind lawyer Matt Murdock. So right away we have this kind of palpable sense of tension because we do know that these characters know who each other are and what they're about, and this is really at the bones of it a Kingpin story, but it also introduces us to the character of Maya Lopez, who is herself a deaf Native American woman who has an unbelievable talent or ability to perfectly physically mimic anything she sees with her eyes. So we have her as basically a champion, kind of Olympic level athlete. We have her a kind of accomplished musician, piano player. We have her a fantastic dancer. She's kind of this prodigy in all things due to this ability and just her drive. And we find out that she's essentially the goddaughter of Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, who after the death of her father, Kingpin kind of helped become sort of her benefactor, helped put her through the best schools and help just be a kind of loving influence in her life, raised her up. And this is where the central kind of drama of this whole arc goes, where essentially when Kingpin's brought into court by Matt Murdock and Foggy Nelson, he wants to kind of have Maya Lopez infiltrate Matt Murdock's life and ultimately wants to turn Maya against Daredevil, the costume crime fighter, by saying it was Daredevil who killed her father all those years ago. When shortly, us as readers find out it was actually the Kingpin who murdered her father, but still agreed to look after his daughter. When she finds out this revelation that Daredevil killed her father, she kind of adopts this alter ego, this person known as Echo, and she starts watching all of these old kind of kung fu videos, martial arts movies, videotapes from fights with Daredevil against Bullseye, and she's able to take all this mimicry and movement, and she hits the streets trying to target Daredevil. Before this happens, though, we have kind of a meet cute between Matt Murdock and Maya Lopez, who kind of fall in love or kind of have this initial infatuation. They're just kind of this perfect, bubbly, fun couple that just seem to get each other, and we have a portion of an issue that's all their kind of dating meet cute story, and then it ends with the flip of her adopting the Echo persona and trying to take out Daredevil. Daredevil knows it's her, though, right away based on her scent and her heartbeat signature, but he can't basically flag her that, hey, don't fight me, I don't know why you're so angry, don't take this out on me. But she, of course, can't read his lips in the midst of combat. We find out that she basically says, you killed my father, and he's like, what? And there's basically an ongoing kind of unraveling of that plot line. We have this tension of Matt Murdock and Maya Lopez getting closer together. All the while, Echo and Daredevil are at odds trying to fight each other. This ultimately leads to the book's climax and ultimate resolution where Maya, or Echo, does discover who really killed her father. And it's just really impactful and interesting, especially the heartbreak of just knowing that Kingpin was there her whole life and kept this horrible secret from her. That eventually leads to a kind of ultimate conflict and a shootout where Echo, we find out, blinds the Kingpin. Really intense, and we also have Daredevil basically seeing that Echo is gone now, and he's kind of just mourning this passing of this character that flew in and out of his life so rapidly. Of course, she does return, and we do get further interactions in future story arcs, things like that, but that's the essential parts of a whole story from David Mack and Quesada. And then we have a last little story near the end of the book, totally different art style, I believe written by Quesada, that has a bit of Daredevil, has a bit of Echo. That story's okay, it's a little bit flat for me, it's really not the selling point of this volume as far as I'm concerned, but it's still nice they included it, and frankly it helps round out this trade paperback volume nicely. Transitioning back to the art for a moment, I will say I love what Quesada brought to the table here. I think it's really beautiful. It's again some of my favorite pencils from him. The motion is all fantastic. I just think it's really great. And I should probably clarify, we do actually have David Mack show up in certain sequences of the art as well. Not just the covers, but also in some sequences that you can really tell that's kind of more painted style. And I think having that kind of intermeshed with Joe Quesada's artwork is probably some of what elevates the art in this book to a whole nother level for me. Really just enjoyed my time here. I do think that this was such a fun, gritty take on Daredevil. I do think Quesada's version of Daredevil is a bit more animated or cartoon-like compared to some other incarnations of the character. I think initially that might be why I'm a little bit turned off by Quesada's artwork, but it really sells it here. I still get a lot of the intensity from the character models and the action sequences, and overall I think between him and the little flourishes that Mack produces, the art is just at a great place in this book. And again, I feel guilty that I've overlooked this collection in recent years. Again, I think with Echo coming out, I had planned to revisit this, and the fact that I got to meet David Mack was almost serendipitous, but with all those factors combined, I knew I had to revisit this title, and frankly, I enjoyed my time here reading some of these issues. As far as I'm concerned, the Marvel Knights era of Daredevil is very strong, and to me it's the birth of the real modern Daredevil we have. I mean, of course you can make the argument for like Frank Miller's Daredevil doing that, but I think late 90s, this new kind of even more modern period of Daredevil, I think we got to see that ushered in by Kevin Smith, and then of course here with the work of David Mack, before we eventually segue into Bendis, which for me again is just great. We go from that to Brubaker, and there's so many runs, and even like kind of the modern runs with Chip Zdarsky, just all great stuff. Daredevil again is my favorite costume superhero, and this was another just fantastic story. And I think a lot of people probably overlook this title, or maybe have neglected to read it because it's not an overly long run, and it can be a story arc that people just leave out when they're thinking about this costume character who has so many great story arcs, writers, creative teams. But I urge you, go try to seek out this from David Mack and Joe Quesada. Parts of a Whole is definitely worth reading, and I think especially with the Echo series coming out, which does look quite good, it could be fun to get the comic basis for that character under your belt. Yeah, wow. I mean, just look at the artwork here. It's absolutely fantastic. It's hard to beat these action sequences. I think the sense of motion from Quesada is really great. I think one of my few drawbacks for this collection, personally, is I think the artwork can sometimes be a bit cluttered or frantic. Like, there's so much, like, panels overlapping each other or sound effects moving all throughout the sequences in certain cases that it can be a bit sensory overload. I think when you just take a quick look at some of the paneling, it can be a little bit much when you just see all the imagery bombarding you at once. But when you really sit down and take your time with it, I actually felt like it was way more digestible than it maybe appears as you just like scan through the comic book. It is interesting to see some of the prevalent styles that were more in vogue or in the cultural zeitgeist at the late 90s, early 2000s as far as the comic book art. I think it still absolutely holds up today, but it's just such a different stylistic choice from a lot of what you see on the rack. And I do think that this has so much character. I do think that modern comic book art, I think that we do have some really stylistic gems, but I think sometimes comic art can kind of look polished and kind of blend together at a certain point. And even going back to the late 90s, there's so much character in some artwork like this that I do think it's still very lush and it does stand out. I do think that this character of Maya Lopez is definitely fascinating. It's great to have another woman of color character in the Marvel Universe that has so much dimensionality and depth. I think that her origin is really fantastic. I mean, she's set up to be such a cool anti-hero, maybe hero or possibly villain, depending on how you portray her. And I think that there's so much going on with this character that is just fascinating. I love her power set. I think that she was a really fun kind of foil or kind of supporting character with Daredevil in this run. And it's just a fantastic comic book origin. I love that this still felt like a Daredevil Kingpin book, but Maya Lopez, Echo, really holds her own. She really starts to steal every scene she's in, and it's really just fantastic. I do think for fans of that character that they've seen in the live-action MCU, and again, especially with that series coming out, you owe it to yourself to check out the comic book origins. Read these issues and these early Daredevil issues from that 1998 run. You won't regret it. It's really cool. I know that David Mack returns with Daredevil Vision Quest, which I also believe has Echo returning, and I think Mack does double duty on that if I'm not mistaken. I know he does the artwork, and it's really kind of beautiful itself. If you're interested in a review of that book, the Daredevil Vision Quest, let me know. I can maybe try to dig it out and read and review that sometime in the future. But for now, this is Parts of a Whole, and wow, I'm so happy I revisited. You got to see the few extras at the back, but that really does it for this volume. I hope you enjoyed my review. I think all that's left to do now is to give this book a grade. For a story that just gets better and better with each reading, the Comic Book Report is happy to give Daredevil Parts of a Whole by David Mack and Joe Quesada a B+. Granted, I'm a bit biased because I love this horned hero from Hell's Kitchen. Daredevil is my favorite, and even with some incredible runs in recent years, I think it's still worth seeking out this little title from David Mack and Joe Quesada. It really has some outstanding artwork, some of my favorite that Quesada's ever produced, especially with those flourishes and covers from David Mack. Really beautiful stuff. A fantastic origin story for a compelling character in the person of Maya Lopez, Echo. Love seeing a good romance subplot, love seeing a good Daredevil Kingpin story, and this volume really does have it all. But you'll have to read it for yourself. If you have, let me know what you think in the comments, or let me know if you think there's other Daredevil books you'd like to see me review on the channel. Thank you again so much for watching, and until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to give this video a like, and maybe check out one of my other videos on your way out. Thanks again so much, everyone, and have a good one.